Hello,
Hi.
hi.
Sorry about that. We had some technical uh,
No,
inspiration.
made it. How's your morning going?
Good, 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 good. Good
Yeah,
morning. How are you doing?
good. Where in New York are you dialing in from?
The Bronx.
Okay, okay. And is that where you live? Is that where your work is?
Yes. Yep. So I
Okay,
live in Mott Haven. It's the southernmost point of the Bronx.
okay.
Yep.
Well, we're so excited to be speaking to you. People who are dialing in, today's conversation is part of Made in NYC, and we're hosting Meet the Maker conversations with makers across the city. And we're so thrilled today to be talking to Ramona, who's the owner and founder of Ojala Threads. I want to dive into your story. I always love starting at the beginning to hear how people started on this path. So, can you tell us a bit about where you're from originally, and yeah, a bit about your childhood?
Okay. Yeah. So I am from New York City. I was born in Washington Heights, and actually born in Midtown, down at St. Luke's,
Hmm.
but raised up in Washington Heights. My brother was born in the Dominican Republic, so my mom sent me out to the Dominican Republic so that I could experience the culture, wait for him to get, legal permission to come to the States. And I was there from the age of 2.5 to about 7.5. At that point, I came back to the States and had to experience the immigrant experience, I would say. So learn the language, learn the culture, and start, living a Dominican American identity. Yeah.
What was that like?
It was really hard. I have very vivid memories of being called Ramona la Mona. So Mona in Spanish is monkey,
Mm.
and I hated my name. It took me a really long time to say Ramona. So now when I introduce myself to folks, I always say my name is Ramona.
How did you
Um,
before?
it was, my great grandmother is who I'm named after. And as I started looking into my roots and started really addressing my indigenous identity and my heritage, it just became more and more important to speak her name, properly and to acknowledge it. And here's a picture of me in school in the Dominican
Oh,
Republic. Yeah. So I keep that there to kind of like remind me of where I came from.
that's so important. That's so important. And so when you came to the States, you're adjusting, it's a bit challenging. Walk us through what that was like into your teens and young adolescence.
So I think like most kids in the 80s that were first generation American, we had an appreciation for our culture. And we wanted to stay true to the things that we loved about it. But there's also a lot of things that were attached to being Dominican or being Hispanic that we questioned. And, you know, the more exposure you have, the more education you have, the more experiences you have, I think the more inclined you are to want to pick and choose which things you want to honor and which things you want to shed. I think Ojalá is a representation of me wanting to create that conversation for children and for parents. So, how do you, as a parent, decide what do I want my children to know, and what are the things that I want them to not necessarily associate um, with, what the modern understanding is of what Dominicanism or what being Puerto Rican or being Cuban or Jamaican is.
Hmm. And what were some of those, you said that there's some you wanted to your children, your family to associate with and other things not. What were some of those things and like what was the thought process of sorting through that?
So, actually, our first design, folklorico, is this one here. And it should remind you of our skirts while they twirl.
Mm-hmm.
So, when I came back from the Dominican Republic, it was really important to my mom that I hold on to our culture. And she enrolled me in dance classes. And I have really vivid memories of putting on the skirt. You always wore a white top with it. So I I'm one of those, my friends always make fun of me because I could wear a white t-shirt every day and still have white t-shirts.
I mean,
I'm like, I'm wearing our adult version of it right now, but like, I
mhm,
love white t-shirts, and all of our onesies are printed on white.
mhm,
And I don't think that's a mistake. It was purposeful. I just didn't realize it. Um, that dance and learning how to dance our music, and understanding, the Caribbean, the African roots of our music are embedded into the design. And when I package each design, I actually include a poem. So I write a poem that will speak to the inspiration behind the design. And this is what the packaging looks like. And this is the poem inside. So this is the one for Agua, which is the last design that I made. And it's inspired by hurricane, which is the symbol for hurricane. And the root, huracán, is the root word of hurricane today. So I put into each piece that I create a lot of the tidbits that I want, parents to have accessible and to be able to hold on to. So I think, folklorico is a perfect example of, you want your children to understand your makeup,
mhm.
understand, even in the poem I talk about the slave trade, but I do it in a way where it is not the focus of the story. It's just a component of who we are.
Yeah, yeah. And so I love that you have those touches uh, to like the work and the packaging. So once you're a teen, you're adolescent, what did you like type of work did you do that then led you into creating the brand that you have now?
You know, when I look back, it all kind of makes sense. But at the time, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
I think that's how it always is. I think when you're like, how are they connected? And then looking back, you're like, oh, obviously that was the progression.
Yeah. So I was talking to someone recently that, my first internship was at a advertising company, one of the key ones on Madison Avenue. And I had gotten new business, and the project was focused on a Reebok campaign for the Latino market. And I'm like, you can't get more like synchronized than that. And then I slowly got interested in international relations.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up, thinking that I wanted to be a police officer. So I got, my undergrad at John Jay. And after 9/11, that was my senior year. I said, I really would rather not go into law enforcement. I think it's more important that we go into diplomacy, because I've always been, I recognized that my strength was more in storytelling, in listening, and in getting people to unite. And I was like, yeah, this is great for diplomacy.
Mm-hmm.
So I went out, got a master's in, disaster management, planning, and military history, because I wanted to really understand how the world worked. And what that did was I went out to Hawaii to do it. And I was in Hawaii for about 10 years. And there I was really embedded in Indigenous identity. And my freshman year, I got involved in a group where they took you around the island and just welcomed you. And I remember one specific trip, they said, we're going to go to a temple, and we're going to, clean this temple. And I said, this is the kind of stuff that I want to do. And this is why I'm here. And I'm like, this is great. And I get ready and I show up, and the temple, the ha'al, was rocks that had been piled outside, and the cleaning was removing shrubs and removing anything that had grown through the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? Like, it just blew my mind, and it redefined for me, religion and how people related to land. And through those experiences, I then began exploring my Taino identity, because throughout, education and throughout my adult life, I had been told, the Tainos were extinct, and, they all disappeared. Mm-hmm. And as I looked more and more and I did my own genetics, I was like, we're still here. So different jobs sort of helped me define everything from our packaging and how I do our community responsibility work and how I defined our corporate responsibility and even how I choose to support specific groups with the sale of certain products.
Mhm.
All of that, even, my work at the FBI was doing outreach to community groups that felt, disenfranchised
Mhm.
from law enforcement. So I can see it all sort of woven in a really interesting way. But I could not have guessed it.
Yeah. So my background's in international development, and I think that um, something that I've often talked to people about is organizations that work in international development, they have often like such a macro view, right? Like, say they focus on education, they're talking to all these organizations around the world every day on education, and they're not always able to share everything that they're learning, and that's unfortunate. And so I often encourage international development organizations to build up their communications so that they can share these lessons globally. So I love that you focused on that. When you were in Hawaii, then what was the transition from Hawaii back to New York?
So I reached a point where in my spiritual path, I just felt a sense of responsibility personally, professionally, and physically. I felt uneasy. I had developed these skills. I had accumulated, this level of education. I had finished in 2017 or 18. I had done executive education at Harvard. I went back to Hawaii, and I felt like I was contributing. And then it got to a point where my contract ended, and I started facing some health issues. And I said, you know, I'm not ready to leave. And my spirit was just like, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, no, I'm not. And it was like, no, you're done here. And then slowly, like, I just felt this uneasiness. And I knew that things here in my community had stagnated. And I could see throughout my visits, I live in public housing with my grandmother, and she's now 90. And over the 29 years that she had lived here, I had gone to college. I had, left, I had come back. I would see all these small signs that, public housing, not only here in New York, but everywhere, was falling apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, the last trip that I came, and I was just like, what in the world is going on
Mm-hmm.
in New York City? And how, like, this gap between those that had and didn't was just getting wider and wider. And a lot of times, in the work that I do, we focus my advocacy work on public transportation, public housing, and criminal justice reform. Folks that are really, really passionate and make the time to do this work and are usually impacted by it don't necessarily have the skills that I've developed doing the government work that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
So I now see myself almost as a translator and a storyteller for individuals that have a lot to say, but sometimes don't feel that they talk right, is
Mm-hmm.
what I get a lot of times.
Yeah.
And, in coming back, I just felt like I could make a more significant impact being here. It isn't easy. I'm her primary caregiver. She's great. And, when it comes to her health,
Mm-hmm.
my health is probably a lot more work than hers, but, she's 90, she's entering that stage where she's like a teenager. So she's a lot of work. My dog is 3, and he's way more mature at moments than she is.
Mm-hmm.
But I've seen, some of the things that I've worked on, like closing Rikers, for example. We passed legislation, and that was like the last penal colony in America. And we're working to close that, and we're working to develop a new vision for what criminal justice needs to be for New York City. And, for public transportation, we passed half-price Metro cards, where people that fall below a certain income level can now qualify for a half-price fare. And those things all come together, to really balance out opportunities for my neighbors. And now, public housing is the one that we're focusing on the most.
And so let's let's talk about what you're building at Ojala Threads and how that started, because all of these topics that we've been talking about, housing, etc., into the work that you're doing with Ojala Threads. So when you arrived back in New York, were there entrepreneurial programs that you were part of to start launching Ojala Threads and thinking as you were thinking about like what you wanted it to be?
Yes. So the birth of Ojala came because of my nephew Jadiel. So I'll share Jadiel with you. So here he is
Oh,
when he was younger. I say younger and more innocent. Um, he's about a year and a half older now. Made in NYC actually did those pictures for us, so shout out to them. So Jadiel was 4 months old and he got meningitis, and he has always been like a really he's been always susceptible to, if you can catch it, he gets it. So I think I always joke like he has my immune system. um, and he gets sick. He ends up in the hospital. He's getting all these spinal tabs. He's in intensive care. His mom is with him and my brother. And, you know, I am obsessed with him and my other nephew, Jaden. I actually had custody of him for a while out in Hawaii. And I go to the hospital and, you know, I'm at the point of my spiritual journey where I understand, you know, from an indigenous perspective, what death is to the Taino people, what the process is, what the roles are that your ancestors play.
mm-hmm.
And as I'm with Jadiel, the night that I stay with him in the hospital after his parents leave, I'm having these thoughts, right? And I'm like, you know, if he passes away, he hasn't met our grandfather had passed away. You know, they'll find him, but like he doesn't understand, you know, who he is and who we are as a people. And I got to thinking, like, what can I give him? You know, how can I prepare him? You know, as I have our ancestral altar in our family. I keep all the portraits, and I'm the one that's kind of creating the space for that. You know, I felt a sense of responsibility to give him all that I could. And I started thinking that I needed to better prepare him. So, you know, we leave the hospital, and the week that he's out of the hospital, I stay with him because he can't go back to daycare because his immune system was too weak to return. And I'm changing his onesie 50 million times a day. And I'm thinking, and I'm like, onesies. And I thought back to when Jaden was born. In Hawaii, all the local shops make really cute pieces that speak to Hawaiian identity and local culture and local values. So like aloha, and you know, how to be a good person in the environment, and like these things that are integral to, you know, being a member of the Hawaiian community. And I said, let me find him some onesies, and I just couldn't find them. So when I looked, the most disappointing find was I found a onesie that said bad hombre. And at the time, that's what Trump was saying about Mexican workers. And I was like, no, there's no way that this is the only option. So I immediately Googled like how to start a company while he was taking a nap. And that same week, I made an appointment with a SCORE mentor. So my SCORE mentor, Jim, still have a relationship with him. We got together, and that was in 2017. By 2018, I had incorporated. I'm simplifying it, but in that process, I teamed up with SCORE for starting the business, for public relations, for branding, for SEO and marketing. I then teamed up with the New York Public Library for research. So the science industry and business library is unbelievable. They helped me identify my indirect competitors, which are some shops in like Arizona and Texas that make pieces for Mexican, American and Central American babies, but no one's really looking at Caribbean. Startup, Start Small, Think Big is another great resource. Made in New York is another one. And then there's all of the city-sponsored centers that are in different colleges. So the small business centers, and the Small Business Industry Center. So I actually have a blog that's linked to our page that's like resources.
Yeah, I think that would be such a helpful resource for newer entrepreneurs. And since this is a part of NYC's week of Meet the Makers, what were the resources through Made in NYC that were most helpful to you?
So I think for us, when I started, I took advantage of every single resource.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was a course which they do regularly, and it's offered in partnership with Pratt. I saw that they tuned in, and it was on email marketing. So because of my health condition, I have a chronic illness. It's ankylosing spondylitis. I have not been able to hold, regular employment. And I was sent to disability, I think it was like in 2018, and I'm still waiting. It takes a really long time in the United States to be considered disabled these days. So public assistance gives me like $198 a month to live on. There's no way that I could take some of the classes that Pratt offers or that SCORE offers without that kind of support. So email marketing, branding, and social media courses that Made in NYC gave totally change the ballpark, right? Because for me, there's no way I would have known what to do. How do you start?
Yeah, walk us through, like, it's something that you register for online. You walk us through what that actually looks like, because I really want these conversations to be useful for people who are in the beginning stages of creating something, so they can say, okay, this is what I need to log on to, this is who I need to ask. And to Pratt Center, who's putting a link to the Learning Lab in the comments right now.
Yeah, and I signed up for the email newsletter. So when I find an organization like We Are Women Owned, for Pratt, for Made in NYC, I always look for the newsletter sign up button. That would be tip number one for me.
Okay.
I sign up for that, and I might be the weirdest person because most people unsubscribe, but I actually skim every email. Like I take it one day a week where I skim every email and I look for all of the events or the resources that they're sharing. And then from those emails, they link you out by subject, basically, telling you like, this is the subject that we're going to be addressing. Show up to the class assuming that no one knows anything. Mm-hmm. Because I've been to classes where like I'll sit there and I'm like, I have no idea what this person's talking about.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't think anybody knows what this person is talking about. And I have reached the point in my life where I'm just not afraid to like feel stupid or look stupid. It's just like, what do we have to lose? We're all in the same bucket. Mm-hmm. If you believe in your idea, feeling stupid for 30 seconds should not stop you from like pursuing that question. And sometimes the questions you ask will make a world of difference. So like in that one class that they did about email marketing, I write poetry, right? But I don't know how to create an email campaign as I walk into that class. And it's a very specific skill set. Without someone that knows how to do that, really coaching you through it, there's just no way for you to, master it. So I would say, register for everything. Make sure that you skim all the emails. Mm-hmm. And when you show up, ask the questions. Because if you don't, then, what's the point of going?
Mm-hmm. That's great. And I think a lot of times people are scared to ask the questions, right? They feel like they're the only one in the room that doesn't know. That's really helpful. And I love that people have been in the comments section adding the links to these resources. This video will be online afterwards as a resource, and so people can follow up there as well. And so tell us, so you're going through all these courses and you've registered Ojala Threads. Then what?
So the next resource that I went after was looking at, making our company official. Mm-hmm. And Volunteer Legal Services of New York cannot speak higher of them. Mm-hmm. They basically match you with legal firms that are willing to do pro bono work. So if you are under a certain amount of income, they will get you. I had Arnold and Porter, which is like, they've had Supreme Court justices sit on their boards. it's invaluable to have someone give you agreements. Coming from the government side, a lot of my, best friends now are business workers and they're creatives. And they're like, well, I just made this beautiful thing and I just gave it to this person. And I'm like, okay, did you sign an agreement? They're like,
Yeah.
what? And I'm like, do you have like a non-disclosure agreement? Did you tell them, how often they have to share it? There are these things that as creatives, we don't often think about. But each product that you have is valuable and you have to protect it, and it's too important to not have the legal foundations for your business from the beginning. And I think if you get into the habit of having those, then you'll have less mistakes. So they prepared for me our incorporation documents. They prepared my intern agreements. They prepared influencer agreements, video releases, image releases, especially when you're working with babies. I own my nephew at this point. Like I own you at this point, but I've had instances where I was working with a friend and they said, sure, our baby can be in your video and it'll be great. And then when our video was cut and images were coming out, they wanted to pull back. And this is a $7,000 production, which we had sort of bantered, bartered for. And at that point I can't pull back a piece of the video when someone has already completely edited it. So although it ended the friendship, I got to keep the video pieces because I had that agreement in place. And it was such a lesson to me. Like I was really upset because this was a friendship of like 15 years. And it was disappointing, but I couldn't say, to the person who gave me the video time, oh, they don't want this now. It just, I can't. So, that's another thing. Like, make sure you legally protect your stuff.
That's so smart of you, and it's amazing that New York is providing those resources. Have you stayed in touch with the person that helped you in that initial phase, or do they kind of pass you on to other people as your business matures?
So the way that it works is you enter a contract, and in the beginning they say, what do you need? And Start Small, Think Big, which is based in New York and in Cali, does the same. Once they address all of the needs that you've stated, then they can close out that contract with you. But if at any time I need new assistance, especially with COVID, they sent out questionnaires saying, does anyone need to have anything looked at, especially leases, agreements, purchase orders? Because if you had entered anything in February and then March, the world is falling apart, they offered legal services for free and matched everyone up to make sure that we could counter it. So they do emergency and then they also do establishing.
Yeah. That's an incredible resource, and a great segue into how I want to end this conversation is, what do things look like for you today, and what has COVID been like?
I think I question, the next day less often. And I feel like that is a sign of progress. 2019, I began really thinking about not measuring our success in sales. The impact for our company is more about how many parents are connecting and how many babies are able to appreciate heritage and are able to speak about their heritage before they can speak. So if that means that, last month we only had one sale, it is hard financially, because parents are facing going back to school and the uncertainty of the fall pickup when it came to the COVID numbers. But the community that surrounds us and the organizations that have been supporting us have remained. We're about to launch a new design, and it's inspired by the symbol for bats. And that speaks to how in our creation story, bats sort of sacrifice themselves to make up different pieces of what the world needed, right? And I think at this time when we're losing so much, it's important, to remember the cyclical space that we're coming into. So it's been hard on a personal level. Public housing did not really prioritize or execute their strategies well. We lost a neighbor across the hall who was like a grandfather to me. One of our core projects in 2019 was this beautiful senior project right here. We created a calendar, and he was Mr. September. And I just got to the point where I can talk about him in a place of peace and not cry. So it's been emotionally difficult. NYCHA, our public housing, had the highest concentration of loss for New York City. So I think, the work that I do and how I give my time, to that topic is exactly what I should be doing at this time. And it's been hard to create and to be inspired. I know for a lot of my creative friends, it's been the same, where you don't want to create from a place of anger, but it's hard, to like not be angry because we're mourning. But my nephew and his mom, she had COVID, and I was very afraid because he had just had another surgery. So there's a lot of fragility, I think, that we've all experienced this year. But there's also a lot of strength that comes from that fragility, and I think that's a good lesson for the world right now.
Yeah.
And babies show that every day. They're super fragile, but there's just such beauty in that.
Yeah. So for people who are watching and they want to buy either the onesies that you're creating for babies or the cloths or bibs, I went on the website to look at some of the different things. What's the best way for them to do that? Online or?
Yep. Yeah. So our website is ojalathreads.com. I'll put it in the comments.
Okay.
And I'll also put our Instagram. And they can just head over to the website. If they use code Made in NYC, they will get a discount until the weekends.
Oh, great.
That'll be a nice surprise for them, because I know the video is going to go up not immediately. So they'll have until Sunday to use the code Made in NYC. Let me try to type it so it's not misspelled.
Well, I think while you do that, I think the fact that Made in NYC is doing their week right now where they're celebrating all these makers, having all these maker conversations, it's a great time of year to be doing that, because slowly people are going to start thinking about the holidays, and why not support something local? And this is just giving them like a menu of options to choose from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. Your story is so inspiring.
Thank you, Haley.
Oh, you're welcome. I want to thank Made in NYC for putting on this Made in NYC week to celebrate all of the makers across the city. Everyone, go online, check out Ojala Threads, learn about what they're doing. I went on the website and I saw in detail kind of your description of what the different designs mean, and it's really inspiring. So everyone, check it out, and thank you so much for taking time to chat.
All right. Thank you so much, Haley. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks, Dorothy. All right.
Bye.
Bye.